Hey guys, Bitesize here with a quick video just to give you some general tips and tricks for Shadow Priests in the War Within. So let's get into it. So first up, Entropic Rift. This new amazing ability from the Voidweaver hero talent tree locks onto and follows the target that you've casted Void Torrent on. So be mindful what you're targeting when you press Void Torrent. For example, in a dungeon like Necrotic Wake with mobs in trash packs that jump around and move everywhere, you don't want them to be the one that your Rift is following. These guys are going to take it away from other mobs, you're going to do less AoE damage, and you're going to get less value from a really big source of your DPS. Instead, try to use your Void Torrent on a stable and preferably central mob to maximize the amount of damage it can do. Next, a little word on Fade. This isn't just a handy ability to use when you've pulled aggro to drop threat, it's also a great damage reduction ability due to the Priest talent Translucent Image. So don't just use this for reducing your threat, because 10% less damage taken might just save your life and come in clutch. Not only that, but Fade reduces your aggro radius, making it an excellent tool for little tricks like, for example, in Dragonflight you could open the cages in Brackenhide Hollow without pulling any mobs when you use this. Quick tip on Power Infusion next. With Twins of the Sun Priestess, you're able to PI somebody else as well as yourself. If you always play with the same DPS and you want to use it on the same person every time you play, you can of course just put their name into a macro. But if you're like me and you're all about that pug life, just use this macro and all you have to do is select the DPS that you want to use PI on, put them as your focus, and now every time that you use Power Infusion on yourself, you're going to give it to them as well. Side note on this, however, your focus can reset while doing things like using vehicles or travel shortcuts, so just something to keep an eye on, just put them back on your focus if this happens. Next, and one for the min-maxers, plan ahead for movement. Don't just react to it, be proactive instead. So this is dependent on you having knowledge of the raid boss or the dungeon mechanics, but once you're familiar with the content, take advantage of that. If you know movement is going to be required, prepare in advance. For example, store up some procs and instant casts, so that when you need to move, you've got spells at hand so you can carry on DPSing and not have any downtime. Think saving up insanity for Devouring Plagues, Shadow of Death and Death Speaker procs, redotting with Shadow Crash, your Shadowy Insight procs for instant cast Mind Blasts, things like that. For the next tip, we're going to talk about Shadow Crash. So in the War Within, we've got two choices when it comes to Shadow Crash. You can target a mob or you can target an area. Personally, I find myself leaning towards the target a mob version, but if you're on a fight where you have a predictable location where adds are going to spawn, it's worth taking the ground targeted option. Monitor your boss timers and use Shadow Crash so that it lands just as the mobs spawn. It's an easy and reliable way to get your dots on as many of them as possible without giving them the chance to spread or move away from the area. Moving on to something a little bit different, if you hate dispelling things from party members, do yourself a favor and get an add-on like Decursive. With Decursive, you get these little boxes that represent your party members, and as you can see by default on my Priest, I can left click these boxes to purify disease, or right click to dispel magic. The boxes will show when a party member is afflicted with something that you can dispel, and it just makes it so much easier and helps you become an extremely valuable member of the party. Next up, a word on Dispersion. This ability is underrated in my opinion, particularly for raid mechanics. Not only is its damage reduction absolutely huge at 75%, but you also move 50% faster during this time and you cannot be affected by movement impairing effects. This makes it an absolute game changer for some raid mechanics. Things like taking bombs away from the raid, soaking enormous hits solo, can even come in clutch for scenarios like taking a boss hit when one of your tanks is dead and no combat res is available. Lots of classes and specs have fantastic utility for this kind of thing, but if your guild is struggling, be open to the fact that you might just be able to be the MVP. Speaking of damage reduction, similar to Fade, Flash Heal via the Protective Light talent gives us a 10% damage reduction for 10 seconds. It doesn't matter if you're at full HP, if you know there's big incoming damage, Flash Heal yourself and get that damage reduction buff. Back to some DPS related tips, an obvious but important one, Void Eruption refreshes your Mind Blast charges, so make sure you've used all available Mind Blast charges before you go into your Void Eruption. It's just free damage. The more Mind Blast casts, more shadowy apparitions, more insanity, more fun. Another tip that I see newer Shadow Priest players forget, be aware of your mastery. Your damage on the target is increased for each dot on the target, including Devouring Plague. Because of this, we don't want to just constantly spam Devouring Plague, reach low insanity and then build back up. Instead, track your Devouring Plague with something like Weak Auras, and spread out your Devouring Plague casts to maximize its uptime. So for example, if I had 100 Insanity, I wouldn't just use 2 back-to-back Devouring Plagues, I'd use 1, wait until it's about to fall off, then reapply it. I will, as a side note however, mention that on AoE currently when talented into Voidweaver, due to the collapsing Void talent, I have been spamming Devouring Plagues while the Entropic Rift is active in AoE and getting some pretty good results. This is just something I'm doing on personal feel, I'm unsure if it's the best practice. Safest bet is go by the rule of achieving maximum Devouring Plague uptime by spreading them out. Another piece of advice that I would give is don't leave your cooldowns off cooldown for too long. Sometimes it's absolutely worth it to wait for your cooldown usage. Maybe you know there's a huge AoE pull coming up, or an important priority target's about to spawn. But be mindful of how long you might be waiting and take stock of whether it's actually worth it over the course of the boss fight or a dungeon. So many times I've seen people saving cooldowns because they want to use them at the optimal time, that they end up getting less uses of those cooldowns throughout the boss fight or the dungeon, and end up doing worse DPS as a result. Sometimes it's absolutely the correct decision to wait, but weigh this up carefully. Next, let's talk about Halo and positioning. So, Halo is a little bit strange. As you can see, it kind of starts and comes back to a point that's a couple of yards away from your character. This isn't just a visual bug, it is actually where the Halo starts and ends. So as a general rule, try to make sure that you're out of melee range, but not further than 40 yards away from all targets that you want your Halo to hit. This is going to be particularly important on raid bosses with large boss rooms, where you might be able to position yourself in such a way that you can sneak some extra Halo damage and bump up that sweet DPS. And finally, and arguably most importantly from a min-maxing standpoint, do not underestimate Twist of Fate. This talent located in the Priest tree means that when you damage or heal a target below 35% health, you gain 10% more damage and healing for 8 seconds. Be aware of this and optimize it. Take for example, you're on a fight where ads spawn. You know those ads are going to die really fast, so as a Shadow Priest, there's no point damaging them. In terms of fully DPSing them, that's a fair opinion, but try to look at it differently. Those ads are an opportunity to get Twist of Fate and increase your DPS. Even if you just put a Shadow Word Pain on one of them, or you snipe a Shadow Word Death as they're about to die, it takes no time at all and it gives you a pretty sizable DPS buff. Maximizing this and making full use of Twist of Fate can be the difference between a good pass and an incredible one. Don't underestimate it. And a bonus tip is that nearly 91% of you aren't yet subscribed, so if this video is useful to you at all, liking and subscribing means a heck of a lot. Thank you guys, and I will see you in the next one.